upset on the internet.
Hi everybody, welcome to Retro Station 1989. This is Commander Dan, the commander and lone human inhabitant aboard the Retro Station. And this is License to Play. It's a show where we evaluate licensed retro games. If it was retro and it had a license based on, I don't know, movies, comic books, stories, yogurt, Chex Mix, if it was based on that, then we evaluate it and let you know if it's worth playing or not. And this is Fantasy Month.
That's Fantasy Month.
That's Fantasy Month. Indeed. And today we're getting into it with a title that's retro and reminds me that I too am retro as hell because it's another Xbox title. But first, we gotta talk some real facts about a rich licensing history. This is going to be a lot of information all at once about a very nerdy topic. So if you need time to take a nap, make yourself a ham Samuel or whatever, there'll be the sound of a loud shriek to let you know when we're done being super nerdy. I mean it. It'll be a loud shriek. All right. Everybody situated? Okay. We begin with J.R.R. Tolkien, the guy who wrote The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and the book everyone but Stephen Colbert says they've read but really only read a wiki entry at best, The Silmarillion. We're not here to go on and on about the books. They're great, and when we spend time on a Fantasy Month episode following something that is based just on those books, we'll talk about it some more. Because today, we're really talking about this franchise, the Lord of the Rings films. That's right, for 3 years this was my obsession and my Christmas tradition. My friends and family would get together and head to the theater for the midnight premiere of Lord of the Rings. This is me as a full-grown man, being dragged back to my childhood Dungeons & Dragons games by a series of sort of faithful-to-the-books movies. But their release was what we adults call fraught, okay? This is Dead Alive, or Brain Dead as it's known in New Zealand, and it was directed by the wonderful director Peter Jackson. He also directed The Frighteners and Bad Taste. Great movies, and Bad Taste is gory, hilarious fun, but he also directed a puppet movie we shall not mention for fear you might think it was good enough to watch, and it's really, really not. It's not worth your time. But if you want to test yourself, it's called Meet the Feebles, and it's terrible. Now, Peter and Fran Walsh created a trilogy of movies out of 3 Tolkien novels, and they brought them to Miramax, who wanted to shrink it down to 1 movie because of the budget. Arguments over this nearly had the Weinsteins bring in Quentin Tarantino to direct it. Can you imagine? Anyway, after all this, it got put into development hell, aka turnaround. So Peter Jackson got himself an audience with New Line Cinema. When producer Robert Shea rescued their project from Miramax, he then expanded it from 2 films to 3 and paid to get the rights away from Miramax and brought it under the New Line banner. And history was written. And over a series of 4 years, 3 movies were completed, all simultaneously. Movies that Peter Jackson assured fans of Lord of the Rings that would take the tone of the novels seriously, which hadn't been done in fantasy in a very long time. It might be clearer if I described it as a historical film, something very different to Dark Crystal or Labyrinth. Imagine something like Braveheart, but with a little of the visual magic of legend. It should have the historical authority of Braveheart, rather than the meaningless fantasy mumbo-jumbo of Willow. Peter Jackson in an interview with the website HerrDerRingFilm.com. Pre-production on the film brought on Philippa Boyens to flesh out the scripts, and Alan Lee and John Howe, famed rings painters, to assist with the designs of the movies. And it shows that Peter Jackson was dedicated to doing right by these stories by turning them and adapting them into film. Thousands of weapons, suits of armor, whole hobbit villages later, and millions, thousands, hundreds of extras later, and on December 19th, 2001, really in a time when the world was basically out of hope, and an embattled and on the precipice of a war that would last literally decades, we kind of needed a movie with a message of good battling evil. We're evaluating a special game today, and while there were 2 incredibly good Lord of the Rings games based on the films, there's a 3rd game that, it's called Lord of the Rings, The Third Age, and it's not about Lord of the Rings at all. In fact, one could say that it's just a pathetic money grab, because one would be telling the damn truth. This is EA's Lord of the Rings, The Third Age. Electronic art. So, okay. Easy. I know. They suck. They're terrible, etc., etc. But here, there was a time when EA was only partially bankrupt of artistic integrity and not thoroughly consumed by what Gandalf and Bilbo would call the dragon sickness. This time was in the early turn of the century, and they still had some ideas. The story of Lord of the Rings is your basic tale of good versus evil. And if you haven't seen the movies, go out and watch them, then come back.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
Okay, here's the quick sum up. Bilbo Baggins is a hobbit with a magic ring he stole from a monster in a cave. It extended his life super long, and when he turned 111 years old, he gave his ring to his nephew Frodo, because he seemed to like to have adventures, and seemed like he would have the ring and do fun stuff with it, I guess. Gandalf, a wizard friend, suspects that there's something up with the ring, so he advises Frodo to hide the ring and don't use it or wear it in case it's something crazy dangerous. Well, Gandalf goes off to college and studies the history of the rings and realizes, oh my god, it's actually the one ring. There's like one ring that rules all the other magic rings and all the other magic and everything else. It's the most dangerous thing in the world. It's a thing ring that's very dangerous. And it's the most powerful ring of all magic rings and the prize sought by the recently reborn evil of all evils, Sauron. So, no, not Sorin. No, not Sorin Bowie either. Oh my, damn it, Cambot, you do this all the time. It's Sauron. That's the Balrog. He's the flame of Udun. Listen, dark fire shall not avail you, Cambot Jr. Now, show them Sauron. Yeah, the tall guy swatting guys around. All right, so tons of walking and talking and fighting and adventuring and monologues later, and they finally destroy the One Ring and the fires of Mount Doom. Yes, exactly right. Frodo and Samwise Gamgee destroy the ring, and the world gets back to kind of normal after everyone gets on a boat. But do you recall the story about the other fellowship? Huh? The bro-down of the fellowship of the following of the plot of the Fellowship of the Lord of the Ring? Well, that's what this game is. EA's Lord of the Rings, The Third Age. The game was designed to be an RPG instead of a hack and slash game, and it does that super well. The game plays a ton like Final Fantasy X and X2, and a lot like Parasite Eve. And that makes a ton of sense because the game was directed by Steve Gray, who worked on Final Fantasy VII and Parasite Eve. And it's not a bad game mechanically. And even just looking at the graphics for the Xbox version, I mean, the version that I have here, you can see that it's made very well. I mean, look at it. The music, sound effects, this game has quality coming out of its yin-yang. But the story is where folks probably will get a real familiar vibe off of this one. See, the story of this game bears a super strong resemblance to the story of Back to the Future 2 and 3, basically. Specifically, the second half of Back to the Future 2 and the first half of Back to the Future 3. The characters in this game are basically cardboard cutouts. Well performed and perfectly voice acted, I will say that. But they're just stand-ins for the characters from the original story. You have a Dunedain ranger, Elagast, the Gondor soldier, Barithor, the elvish warrior, Idriel, and her wonderful bow, and the dwarf, Hadad, and even a Rohirrim named E.A. Oden. Do you believe that? No lie. E.A. Oden. And he's voiced by Charles Martinet, Mario himself. So let's take a look at the whole package and evaluate this game properly. So the story of the game is Lord of the Rings, but you're playing cleanup for the real protagonists. You're going to Isengard to meet with the council, but oh, orc fight! And so you miss them just by a little bit. Then you chase down the Fellowship to Moria, and oh, whoops! You gotta fight the Sentinel in the lake now and take care of their business. And then the Fellowship of the Ring escapes Moria, and Gandalf is killed, sorta. And then you help him. You and your group help him against the Balrog somehow. There's a lot of that. In fact, the word, you do that thing somehow, should be every sentence in the manual. And so on. It's like Back to the Future 2. You run around not really affecting moments of Lord of the Rings, but totally affecting the events of Lord of the Rings is what the game wants you to believe. And knowing the story isn't canon, well, it leaves us with a real question. The graphics, sound, and acting are all top tier, but the story is nearly completely without weight. And so, the question looms, does Lord of the Rings, The Third Age, have a license to play? Ooh, I'm gonna have to say no. It's a fantastic game, top to bottom. But in this case, no, it doesn't have a license to play because it's not a story that you will feel compelled to play after the first maybe hour or so. After the first couple clips from the films, you're going to be like, wow, that was really impressive. And at the time, everyone was just devouring all the Lord of the Rings content that Peter Jackson was making, bar none. But bar this, because it's not about Lord of the Rings. It's a money-grabbing title that they just wanted to keep making money off these. And while it's not the game itself is it's a role-playing game, which is great. But it's about characters that don't really mean anything, and you already know how the story ends. This is probably kind of why people aren't loving that Andor series so much. I know he ends up as a skeleton in the water. I mean, I know what happens to him in the most interesting part of his life, and I'm sure the show is very good, but couldn't they just made it about somebody else? Or not had the characters die at the end of Rogue One, if that was going to be the case? I don't know. My Star Wars brain is all broken anyway. You don't have to listen to me. I'm an old man in space. But what you do have to listen to is this. No license to play for good old Third Age. I have played it recently, and I really did like it, but it doesn't have a license to play. Trust me, if your love for those movies isn't like top tier, you're going to pass on this one anyway. So, thanks everybody for showing up. If you liked what you saw, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't, keep it to yourself. Nobody has to know your opinion all the time. No, I'm kidding. Let me know what you thought. And that's what the comment section is down below. And if you have any suggestions for licensed games for next month, I'm open. Next month is Christmas, and ooh boy, do we have a big one planned for you. Anyway, hang in there, folks. It's almost Thanksgiving, it's almost Christmas, and it's the end of Fantasy Month.
That's Fantasy Month.
That's Fantasy Month. Thanks again for showing up. And if you want to see more of these, just subscribe. I put them out every couple weeks. Thanks again, and you have a great, great holiday season. And more than anything I've said during this broadcast, my last broadcast, the next 50 broadcasts, remember to always, always, always stay retro. Peace.
Get upset on the internet. You're a salt adult. You're a salt adult. Get up.